Hello, welcome everybody. So good afternoon and welcome to the 2020 FIPDes Webinar. So I am Barbara Rega. I am the Managing Director of FIPDes, which is the Food Innovation and Product Design Erasmus Mundus Master. And I'm very glad to welcome you all to this first virtual meeting and conference. And we're very glad to have you all from all over the world. So before giving the floor to our dear guests, a few words about FIPDes. So FIPDes in a nutshell. So FIPDes stands, as I said, for Food Innovation and Product Design. And this is a master that has been jointly designed by 4 European universities. So Technical University Dublin, Lund University, AgroParisTech, and Università degli Studi di Napoli in Italy. So we have started almost 10 years ago, and in 2018, this master has been awarded the Erasmus Mundus Success Story label. So we are very, very thankful for this. So till now, we have had the pleasure to train and welcome 9 cohorts of students, meaning almost 200 students and 63 different nationalities. And we are visible over more than 100 countries. So which are our objectives? We want to train a new generation of talents which are capable of working across the borders and the sectors with an inclusive approach of innovation to create sound, sustainable and healthy food solutions for the future societies at corporate, entrepreneur and institutional level. To do so, we work with our big network of universities and associate partners, and we have several dynamics, very active ones, and we used to work with a high level of professional exposure with the help and the cooperation with our alumni network. But of course, this master is based on the cutting-edge research at our universities and the innovative learning and innovation platforms. So one of these activities that we organize in FIPDes is the FIPDes Day, which is an international workshop on the top from topics for food innovation and product design. And this year, for the first time, we have organized it in form of a webinar. So we had this idea today to focus this webinar on a hot topic, I would say. And so ask us the question of which are the opportunities for the transition to sustainable, healthy and inclusive food systems, especially after the lessons that we could learn from the COVID pandemic situation that is still ongoing. So I think that this is a big question that could be handled under from different angles. And this is why we have the pleasure and the honor to invite today 4 speakers that would give you very different perspectives from research point of view, or from the food supply chain point of view, or even the international relationship and European vision. So I really am very thankful for their participation, their availability to join. And so before starting and leaving the floor to the first speaker, Michael O'Donoghue, I just want to remind you some rules and informations. So at the end of each presentation, you can, of course, ask questions, and each session of question will last around 10 minutes. And you can raise your hand using the hand. You can see the symbol on your screen. Okay, so in this way, we will give you the rights to talk and to share your thoughts and your questions. Also, I want to remind you that this session is recorded because in this way, we are going to reach all the alumni and students that are all over the world on the other side of the world. So now it's, at that moment is night, so they could watch at the video tomorrow. So thank you again. And so I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Michael O'Donoghue from INRAE France. He's the head of Transform Division and is a biochemist and an enzymologist. And he's currently leading the European distributed infrastructure for industrial biotechnology since 2016. And it's also the head of a big research division in INRAE, which focus on science for food, bio-based product and waste engineering. So I leave the floor to Michael, and I thank you for your attention.
So thank you, Barbara, for the introduction. I'll just put my screen. Hopefully everybody can see my screen correctly. So thanks to Barbara for the introduction and for the FIPDes team for inviting me this afternoon. As Barbara said, I'm leading one of INRAE's divisions, which is called Transform, and we work on the science that's behind food and non-food engineering, and we also work on waste engineering. But this afternoon, I would like to talk to you about a topic that's quite central at the moment to our division strategy. It's something that we're thinking a lot about because it's very topical, which is the circular bioeconomy. And what I'd like to talk to you about this afternoon is how food fits into the picture of the circular bioeconomy and what the circular bioeconomy means for food. So I'm probably going to be going quite quickly through my slides, and hopefully it will give you some food for thought and some ideas for questions at the end of my talk. So first of all, what is a circular bioeconomy? Now, to answer that question is not so easy. It's easier to ask the question than to reply to the question, because the definition of the circular bioeconomy is not yet standardized. So there's several definitions of the circular bioeconomy. There's the European definition, there's member state definitions, and there's also definitions that you can find in other countries outside of the European Union. With regards to my institute, INRAE, we've just published or made public a vision for the bioeconomy according to our institute's vision and capacities. And at the moment it's available in French, but in the next few days it should also be available in English, but you've got here the reference in French. Now, to answer the question of what is a circular bioeconomy, I'm going to answer very simply and say, well, behind the circular bioeconomy, you have three concepts. You have the concept of an economy, you have biology, and you have the notion of circularity. Quite often when I think about a bioeconomy, and especially when I explain it to other people, I always take the counter example of the current economy, which is in many ways the oil economy or petro economy. And so if we consider this fossil-based economy, what does it look like? Well, the fossil-based economy obviously relies on resources such as oil, but also natural gas and coal and things like this. And actually, our current economy is very powerful because, well, fossil resources are there. They're just waiting to be used. You don't need to do anything. We don't need to produce them. They're also, and this is very advantageous for the fossil economies, fossil resources are very energy dense, and they're quite simple to use. Obviously, I'm talking in a relative way, and you'll see why I say simple later. So they're quite simple to use and easy to convert. For instance, oil is composed of, mainly composed of carbon. It's composed of quite small molecules that are highly reduced, and so that facilitates their further use. The extraction of fossil resources, and this is very important to point out, but of course you know this, is a finite process. So in other words, we're going to run out of these things one of these days. And this is irrespective of the extraction method which you use. Whatever you do, whatever technology you apply, these things are going to run out one day. And as I speak, I don't know of any technology that allows us to recycle or regenerate fossil resources, and I don't think it exists on a human timescale. On the other hand, a bioeconomy is an economy that's based on the use of photosynthesis-based resources, and it uses biology across value chains. So the bioeconomy covers all sectors and systems that rely on biological resources. So it includes plants, of course, but also animal products, microorganisms, and any really raw materials that are derived from biomass, and this includes, of course, organic waste. So once I've said that, you can very easily see that the bioeconomy includes food, and in fact, food production and conversion forms a very large part of the bioeconomy. Now, coming back to what I said about the oil economy, raw materials in the bioeconomy are rather complex. They're bio-based molecules. They're highly complex from a chemical point of view. They're oxidized, and they're structurally complex as well. And of course, they're highly diverse. So you've got very big differences between plant-based bioresources and animal-based bioresources and so forth. Unlike the petroeconomy, the bioeconomy has the advantage of the fact that the production of photosynthesis-based raw materials is scalable and theoretically infinite. So in other words, you should theoretically be able to continue to produce bioresources on a piece of land from one year to the next, and of course we all know that. But we also know that that's not quite true, because it all depends on how you produce the bioresources. So we can see here that the scalability is demonstrated over the last over the period of 40 years from 1960 to the year 2000, where we had steady increases of world food production, and this was due to the fact that the intensity of agricultural production was increased, using more fertilizer, using more phosphate fertilizer, etc., etc. But we also know that by doing this, we're actually compromising the process, because we know that the more intense agricultural production has become, the more fragile and the less sustainable it's become. And so we know today that this type of agriculture is actually compromising soil productivity, and therefore compromising the infinite process that we are relying on for the bioeconomy. Coming to the last part of the circular bioeconomy, I just wanted to say a few words about circularity, although what I'm going to say is pretty obvious, I think. The current value chains, whether this is food products or non-food products, bio-based products, we're generally looking at linear value chains. So you go from production in the field or whatever, right the way through to waste production. So you go through processing, packaging, logistics, retail, consumers. And in this linear value chain, you have quite a low amount of recycling and circularity. So you do have some in the, of course, in the agricultural sphere, where you have feedback to the soil, for instance, manures and co-products of animal husbandry, for instance. On this scheme as well, you can see that most of the environmental impact measured in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, equivalent emissions, are on the production side, but you do have 1/3 of emissions that are related to the other parts of the value chain. When we compare linearity with circularity, we can ask the question, well, what changes? Well, what does change is that when you look at a circular system, you take a full life cycle perspective, and therefore you look at it from cradle to cradle. And so you're linking the waste production back into the primary production. And you're also linking, in the case of food, you're linking the case food value chains with other systems. So you're linking them to the water system, the energy system, and also to non-food products. So having given you this slightly lengthy definition of a circular bioeconomy, how does a circular bioeconomy change things for food? And this is what I'd like to focus on for the second part of my talk. So how are things different, and what does it all mean for future food production, and what might be some scientific challenges that you would be interested in? Well, first of all, if I take this, looking at the circular system, we start with the production systems. We all know that we need to go towards new alternative farming systems. I've listed a few here on the left-hand side of the slide. We all know about organic farming, agroecology, etc. We need to make systems that are sustainable. So, in other words, that favour, potentiate the infinite nature of this process. But by changing the primary production system, obviously we're going to change quite a lot of things. We're probably going to go towards more mixed primary production systems. In other words, we're not going to be relying on large mono crops, but rather mixed crops. And when you say mixed crops, that means you have mixed raw materials, and therefore you're going to have a multiplication of the value chains that are associated with these production systems. We'll probably see an increase in varietal diversity, because we know that increasing varietal diversity can actually be quite advantageous, for instance, to in the fight against plant diseases, for instance. There'll be it will definitely, many of these farming systems, or all of them, will be lower input farming systems. So the fact that the input charge changes will mean that we'll also have modified composition of the raw materials that are entering into the processing. And finally, we'll have different economic models, because there'll be other criteria imposed on these new farming systems. Not only will they be expected to produce raw materials for, let's say, food manufacturing, but also probably they'll be required to deliver ecosystemic services. And therefore, the notion of, or the definition of the quality of what you're producing is altered, because you're seeing quality from a different perspective. In processing, there'll also be changes as well. And of course, since all of these things are tied together, some of the changes are linked to what I've just said. We'll need to meet the challenge of dealing with the feedstock variability that I've just mentioned. But we also need to move towards much more sustainable processes. Although only a third of the beyond farm gate, although only a third of the emissions associated with food value chains are beyond the farm gate, it's still a third of the emissions, and this needs to be decreased. So there'll also be a lot of focus on producing more sustainable processes, so that use less resources, less energy, less water, but also that actually make better use of the raw materials that are entering into the process. And of course, we know that there's a lot of pressure at the moment to meet new societal demands for food. So decreasing the use of ingredients that are increasingly perceived as being nocive for human health, but also reducing the presence of animal proteins in our diets in favor of plant-based proteins, and also providing foods that will be adapted to 21st century expectations and lifestyles, so an increasingly urbanized and aging population. So what does this all mean? I've just made a few examples here. Well, I can imagine that we're going to need to move towards more modular processes that will provide us with ways to be more flexible with regard to the feedstock, which will be more variable. I've just mentioned that, but also robust, because we still need to produce products that have fairly constant quality. We might be looking at a move, or at least to some extent, to downsizing of processes. And this would be a way to ensure that we can better close loops and keep a certain number of operations close to the place where the feedstock is produced. And I'll come back to that in a second. We'll also be looking at the development of cascading processes. This is a way to get better value out of your your resources, the incoming resources, so actually using your resources better. And this is all about getting the highest value, limiting entropy, and optimizing the use of your resources. And another idea is that maybe we'll see an increase of bio-based, biotech-based processes in the food industry. For instance, new processes to ferment foods, and therefore to introduce new ways to preserve them. Coming back to the downsizing, one of the drivers for this could be linked to the move from, at least for certain value chains, not all value chains, but there could be some move towards local-based production. And so on the left-hand side in grey, you can see a sort of a very simplistic scheme of what current logistics looks like. Basically, you have production on the farm and transport to a central conversion facility where you're actually going to manufacture your products and irrigate several markets. On the other hand, the other extreme, you've got the local production system where you produce on the farm, and very close to the farm, you convert the raw material into products, and you serve a single market, which is the local market. And you've also got hybrid systems which could be developing, where you actually break up the conversion process. So you might have some sort of first primary conversion which occurs close to the field, which allows greater ability to drive some of the components of the raw materials back into the production system, return to the field. And you also create a stabilized intermediate product, which then goes to central facilities, which can then continue to irrigate several markets. And so we might see a diversification of the way value chains are organized. And this will affect the way we process. Further along, we might see changes in the way we package and conserve foods. So there's definitely going to be a move wherever possible to less packaging and alternative conservation methods. So I have already mentioned the idea of fermented foods, but you've also got this example of the edible water pods, where you actually make the packaging as part of the food, and so it becomes edible. And of course, packaging will still continue to be an important part of food, and therefore we need to go towards more sustainable packaging with the development of compostable materials and bio-based materials. And finally, when we get to the waste part, there's quite a lot of innovation going on there, and will continue in the future. Obviously, things around what we're already seeing, the development of technologies to use organic waste, for instance, methanization, but we'll also see more advanced systems to improve and innovate in wastewater treatment, to improve organic matter and mineral recovery. And so in the future, many people think that the future water treatment stations will no longer be water treatment stations, but more wastewater valorization stations. And when we look at the ultimate use of waste, of course, there's all the questions around how to use what occurs once you've got to the end of the entropic system, which is very small chain carbon-based molecules like CO2. And there's starting to be quite a lot of focus on the use of chemotropic microorganisms to use CO2 as a raw material to keep organic carbon within the technosphere. And keep using it in a cyclic way. So I'd like to conclude there, after just giving you a whole bunch of ideas, with just how I see some of the questions that are going to affect food there. So basically, the circular bioeconomy is going to be quite disruptive for the agri-food industry in the future, and it raises a lot of questions about food quality. And so, for instance, with food security, there's a very obvious question which is raised because there's going to be more demands on available land, because we want to be producing more raw materials for more products, for different products, and so we want to be getting more from less, and at the same time changing the production systems. Equally, we'll see questions around food safety, because the introduction of new ingredients and new production methods will definitely raise new questions about food safety. There'll be issues about nutritional quality. The obvious one is around plant-based proteins versus animal-based proteins, and the differences in nutritional quality between those two sources of proteins. And all of this will add up to challenges on also for the design of new foods that are appealing and have nice taste. And of course, this is going to be a big challenge when you start changing processes, when you start to want to make foods with less additives, etc., etc. And finally, there's the whole issue of food sustainability and developing new food preservation methods, and also dealing with the question of food waste issues. So to sum up in a nutshell, overall, I think the bioeconomy, the notion of the circular bioeconomy is going to generate quite a lot of challenges for us in the future. And therefore, I think for the students who are following the FIPDes Erasmus course, you have a lot of prospects for a lot of exciting work to be done in the future. And on that, thanks for listening to me.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for this very inspiring presentation and the opening presentation of this webinar. So now it's time for questions. So please raise your hand if you have any question. Yes, Zaira? Zaira? Unmute your mic and you should be able to talk. Zaira? And
if not, Barbara, if somebody has a question they can't ask it, they can write it in the chat and I'll read it.
Yes, if you have problem with your microphone, you can, yes, you can use the chat. And Michael, we can see your screen.
Okay.
Of your computer screen.
Can you stop to?
Yes. Yes, we can see.
Is that okay now?
Your camera? Yes.
Good.
So, do you have any question? I cannot see on the chat or the hands.
Okay, if there's any later, I can take them. I'll be around for an hour or so.
Lucy, please ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Yeah. So first, thank you for the presentation. I found it really interesting in the given time. And I had a question about the time you think it will take for a real circular bioeconomy to be fulfilled. Will it be in 10 years or will it take longer to really be effective?
Okay, thanks for the question. That's a tough question. I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't give you a real timeline. What I would say is, obviously, the concept of the circular bioeconomy is a really challenging, complex concept because there's a lot of things to achieve. On the other hand, if we want to be optimistic, elements of the bioeconomy and even the circular bioeconomy already are there. So it's not like we're starting from zero. We have things to build on. an agri-food chain in itself is already part of the bioeconomy. The question is now is how can we improve that and introduce the circularity? And as I said, there's already elements of it developing. So I don't think you can imagine the development of a circular bioeconomy like something that we're going to switch on from one day to the next. And if actually, when you look at the history of the petri economy, it was something that was slowly introduced over a 200-year period. I sincerely hope we don't make 200 years to make the circular bioeconomy, but I think it's something that you have to imagine will occur progressively across the 21st century.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have other questions? Lucas, please. Lucas, we switch on your microphone, Lucas, and yeah, try to talk. Normally it should work.
Okay, now it works.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. No, I just wanted to ask a question regarding the fertilizer that you were talking about it before. Do you see that then as the next big challenge now that we switch from fossil-based energy to plant-based energy, for example, and then afterwards in 10 years we will have again a problem because we don't have the fertilizers anymore because phosphor is going to end?
So first of all, as you know, current fertilizers rely heavily on fossil-based resources because they use fossil resources for their synthesis. And so with regards to nitrogen-based fertilizers, there's a lot of potential to offset the use of fertilizers using new varieties, using mobilizing the ecosystem, so using nitrogen fixing microorganism systems, etc. Regarding phosphate, obviously that's also an issue because phosphate resources are fairly limited. We know that they could cause problems in the future. Maybe the optimistic reply to the question is there's also quite a lot of scope to improve the use, the efficiency of the way we use phosphate and also the recovery of phosphate. So it's not all bad news, but yes, phosphate is also a resource that is less talked about, but is a very finite resource and very scarce across the planet.
Thank you so much. Do you have another question? Siddharth?
Hello. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for a very nice presentation about circular economy and yeah, good introduction of sustainability. I actually had many questions, but maybe I cut down to one. Maybe it could be a bit abstract, but if we think of sustainability and the circular economy, in my mind, I always try to compare as hunter-gatherers as humans were before. That was quite more sustainable than what we are now. And in the future, do we take steps to from learnings from the history? Do we go backwards and into in time and then try to learn from them, or the ways that we are used by them, or do we have to think of really new technologies, because every technology is another added problem or a challenge to the sustainability? So yeah, that was my question.
Okay, very philosophical question. I'm not sure I can give a good answer, but I understand the idea. I think there are things to learn from the past, because again, without going back to hunter-gatherers, until the start of the 19th century, let's say, we were still very much in a bioeconomy. Most resources were derived from bio-based. Most products were derived from bio-based resources. So there's a lot to learn there, but don't be tricked by the idea of thinking that certain things were more efficient before than they are now, because that's often an error that people make. Many of the old processes were very, very inefficient from an energy perspective. So I think there are things to learn from the way things are organized. I can think of lots of examples, and I don't have time to talk about them today, but for instance, simply in the agricultural, agronomical sphere, which I'm not an expert in, but I can cite one example of more traditional ways to organize cropping, so that you actually use several varieties within a single field system, and you create sort of firewalls in order to avoid the spread of phytopathogens. That's a very old system. I've seen results presented from farms in China, remote farms in China that have been using this techniques for rice production for many, many centuries. And so there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge there that we can use. On the other hand, technology is something that's intrinsic to human beings. All of our progress so far, all of our evolution has been determined by our capacity to harness technologies from the day that I guess human beings learned how to master fire. Yeah. So I don't think we can consider technology as a problem. I think that's too binary a way to look at things. Yeah. And our current status is we have enormous potential in terms of technology for the future. I'm a biotechnologist, and the biotechnology is considered to be a cornerstone of the bioeconomy, and I think there's a lot of scope still there to develop very, very powerful technologies that can take us further along into the future. So I think it's a combination of the two. I think there's things to learn from the past, integrating knowledge, but there's also the power of the technology that's there to be taken and used.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we have time for a short last question. And I see that Eddie.
Yeah,
Natalia.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Thank you, Michael, for everything. Well, my question is about what kind of problems or what kind of difficulties do you think is going to be with the taste of the food? Because you talked something about of the taste. And with this new circular bioeconomy, do you think we need to find a new customers for that?
Well, I can give you an obvious example, which is we know that, for instance, the substitution of animal-based proteins for plant-based proteins creates quite a lot of challenges in terms of food taste, because plant-based proteins are a cause of off taste, so that's already known. But I also mentioned earlier the fact that there's a push, I would say, across the planet, definitely in Europe, but I mean, a lot of this started in Brazil, for instance. So there's a push towards less transformed food, so with less additives, and some of the additives that we use already actually are taste improvers. And so there's challenges there. If we're going to eliminate some of these additives, we need to readdress the questions of food taste and find new paths for innovation, in order to create food that still is satisfactory to the consumer. So did I answer your question, or was there another dimension to the question?
No, it's all right, it's fine. Yes, I understand very clearly. Thank you very much.
There's a lot of challenges around taste, and there's a very interesting question as well, if I can allow just a second more, is it's a question that I'm interested in at the moment with colleagues in my division.
Yes.
Is how do you also balance other sustainability criteria with appealingness and tastiness? So what is the margin of maneuver for food producers to say, okay, this food is slightly less tasty, but it's much more sustainable? How will a consumer react to that? And I think there's some really interesting research to be done there.
yeah, something like that. I don't know if that, I think the society have to learn. Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So thank you again, Michael, for this presentation. So I would like to pass to the second presenter. Yes, can you see my? Yes. So it's yes, Vibeke Orlien, University of Copenhagen, Denmark. And so she's assistant professor at the Department of Food Science and Design and Consumer Behavior. And so Vibeke has a PhD in food chemistry. And the research areas she covers are the thermodynamics in food chemistry, but also non-thermal processing technologies and protein modification. And so she's also addressing practical functional food design, covering the coupling between food process methods and technologies and food chemistry. So I think this is a perfect link to the last questions that you just asked. So I leave the floor to Vibeke.
Vibeke,
So,
please unmute your mic.
Now it works, yes. It was just unmuted. Yes, so, oops. Just need to figure out this one. We'll start from here. Here. Thank you for the invitation, and now I think I'm in control of what is going on here with everything. So I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about green solution for green food. And yes, it's right. I'm more or less continue where Michael left with some of the question. I don't think I will answer them, but we will see. And okay, there's a little trouble with how to shift. So bear with me. My keyboard is not communicating with my laptop, so might be some problems. Anyway, I will quickly go through some fact about Copenhagen University and food, not so much because you can actually see them again. And then we will go into alternative protein sources, protein extraction methods, structure into meat analog, and protein digestibility. And the reason is the fact about University of Copenhagen. We are quite old university. That's nothing in itself, but we have managed to be so old, I think, because we of course generate and apply scientific knowledge at the highest level. I think all university aims for that. Then we are also an international university, so you are all welcome to come here. Maybe not right now, but after Corona, then you're welcome here. And we also, this also says that we are a good university. We are of course very proud of being among the best in the world, so I just have to flash this one. Then the Department of Food Science is where my section for food design and consumer behavior is placed. And what we work for is also to get knowledge and understand the design of foods. So food is in focus, of course. And we work again to understand relationships, understand interaction, and finding new raw materials and how to prepare them into food. And we'll work and collaborate with all kind of institution and people. Now, as the agenda is transition for sustainable and healthy foods, it is of course plant-based that is interesting, and it's interesting for all of us. And the challenge is then, as Michael also said, how to produce them. I will present some thoughts about this topic for inspiration for you, because you are the future researcher and you will also be the future food providers. So we will count on you. Plant-based foods is much, of course, as again, it should be renewable and sustainable. It can be different kind of things. It can be the original plants or byproducts. But the questions and the challenge is the quality. So we have both a functionality quality. It should be working in a food matrix or food system. But we also have the biofunctionality. You should also be able to eat them and stay healthy. There are many different plant raw material. Obviously, as we saw on this one, we have the legumes and the cereals. We know them. But we also have algae and grass. And then an example is also sugar beet leaves. Whatever is a side stream or leftover for production of other things. So if we could eat these things, it would be at least some part of sustainable food systems. Again, the challenge is they have to be eaten, they have to have some kind of function, and the sensory aspect, as you also discussed before, and then of course the health. So the thing is that these tops or green leaves from whatever this is a sugar beet may not be waste anymore. You don't hear many food processing people or working with food talking about waste. Now it is byproducts or side streams in order to show and signal that there are something in them we can eat. And that's also a way to look into sustainable food systems. This one was skipped. But we cannot eat grass, and we cannot eat the top of the sugar beets, and we cannot eat the algae as such. So we need to do something. We need to extract the protein, for example, or other nutrition from these green tissues. And the methods that can be used are different physical or chemical methods, technologies. Could also be biorefinery, which is a relative new thing. The challenge is then it has to be effective for extraction, and in that way has to separate the proteins somehow. All these examples may not be totally sustainable, as also Michael discussed and talked about before, but it is maybe what we have now, and we need to improve everything. These deliver different kind of plant protein ingredients. We can have flour, unrich flour, concentrate, and isolate. And as you can see, they have different percents of protein content in them. And that, of course, means with this one, there is a lot of other stuff that also has to be taken into consideration when you try to develop a food with this one. Then we have this grass, as I told you about. Now, these lucerne and clover grasses are somehow interesting because they're used in organic farming as a crop rotation crops. So it means that when they grow the legumes or the cereals, or not the cereals, the crops, then sometimes they need to rotate it, and that was also what Michael's talk about. You had different kind of crops in the same field, but now some organic farmers are using these grasses. The problem is, again, that we cannot eat it, but a new research and production research or setup is the biorefinery. And it could be maybe more sustainable that the physical or chemical technologies I showed you before, because you actually just, maybe not just, but at least you use a screw press, then you have some green juices, then you can filtrate it, and then somehow, and that's what is going to be investigated, you can maybe use it as food protein for application. There is actually a research and production in the Netherlands that actually says they can use or produce the protein Robisco from green leaves. These green leaves are interesting because they are the most abundant raw material in the world. So could we use them and eat grass, for example? Now, what to do about them then? Obviously, you cannot eat protein alone, so we need to put them into some kind of food in order for them to be eatable. One thing is meat analog or meat substitute. Here's a picture of, as it says, commercial plant-based meat alternative products. So there is existing a lot of meat alternatives or substitutes on the market. What we can see here is that there are all some kind of minced meat they look like. And the problem is, of course, that meat, as you can see here, has a very specific structure, and that is exactly these myofibrillars. This myofibrillar or myofibrillar structure is very difficult to imitate or mimic or produce. And everybody that has eaten meat know that if you have this whole muscle meat piece, when you chew it, you have a certain hardness, you have some gumminess, chewiness, fracturability, springiness, cohesiveness. All these special sensory attributes or properties is related to meat. And then there is the taste. Should it taste like meat? And we also have the appearance. Should it look like meat? So flavor of the meat is important. So flavor of the meat analog is similar important if we want to do something that looks like meat. And maybe obviously for somebody, a meat analog should look, taste and feel like meat. But that is maybe also the problem, because as we see, there is maybe a burger battle going on. It has become very famous to make these meat substitutes that even Burger King and McDonald's now have used it. So are they trying to make meat substitute mainstream, or is it the people who wants it? What we can see here is also it's a quite large ingredients list. And that's again it. What are we putting in these meat substitutes? Where does these texturized wheat protein come from? Potato protein, pea protein, rice protein, and then all the other things. That's sustainable to have to produce all these kind of ingredients to put it into something that looks like meat. Why not eating the potato as they are or the wheat protein as they are, and then use other kind of protein, for example, from grasses or other side streams? And the other question is also, and that's a whole nother business, is this clean label, as most people would like to have? But again, we don't just eat proteins, we need to do something about them. And one processing is extrusion. Here you can make a mimic of meat structure. You know, food extrusion technology has been around for more than 15 years. Usually the low water extrusion, that is the one, that is producing like cereals and pasta, that we know. If we go into the high water extrusion technology, then it's possible to make some TVP, that means texturized vegetable proteins that looks like meat and mimic meat. Often, for now, they are aiming at mimic chicken meat, because as you can see, the color is not the same. There are a few commercial products of this on the market. The tough thing or the difficult thing is the whole setup. As you can see here, the extrusion has quite much technology in it. We have a feeding zone, a mixing zone, and a melting zone. This is the whole extrusion. In this one, you have a high temperature, you have a high pressure, so you have actually a high shear force. And this is the one that can actually change the raw material into something looking like this. Then the dye is also important, and the cooling zone is also important. So you have a lot of parameters you can actually work on in order to make this one. And it's difficult, and that's also why you don't see extremely much of this kind or type of meat analog on the market. What happens then? Well, first of all, the big challenge about plant protein is that they often look like this. They are globular. And when you put globular proteins and try to associate them or kind of glue them together, you will get something like this. And as if you remember, the meat structure, it doesn't look like this. So you need to do something. You need to unfold the protein. That what can be done in the extruder by sharing. Then when you have the unfolded protein, they need to be either degraded or kind of aggregated together into smaller example, for example, or clumps, and then again to make something that looks like meat. As you can see, these are all the protein-protein interaction that is supposed to be in a meat or a meat analog. We have hydrophilic interaction, hydrophobic interaction, hydrogen bond, and disulfide bonds. Almost all kind of chemical interactions you can think about. So what is important when we work with plant protein is that we need to have some kind of conformational change. And there is a strict coupling between the conformational change and the extrusion parameter or other kind of technology we're using. And if we don't get it right, we will not get this beautiful alignment of the proteins, and then we will not have something that looks like the fibrillar structure of meat. The other thing that is not shown here is then, of course, what about all the other components that are in, for example, a meal, or you put in your meal mix or into the extruder. It could be carbohydrates or lipids in order to give something more for the product, because as you know, meat is not just the meat proteins. There's other stuff in it kind of giving both the structure but also the special taste of meat. And for example, if it's sugar, they can react with the protein in something called Maillard reaction. It could be good, but it could also be bad. If you have lipid in it, you could start some lipid oxidation. That is definitely not good. So there is a lot of other factors you have to think about when you look into different technology in order to make meat analogs or substitutes. A quite new idea or technology or method is to use enzymes. Enzymes are able to make something that is called amyloid fibril formation. So again, you have your globular protein, plant protein. Then you need something to, again, unfold them, align them into a linear structure, more or less. Then you can make something that is called a protofibril, and then you can kind of glue those together and get a fibril structure that has maybe the same chemical or physical structure as a meat fibril. Usually you use, or not usually, but there has been some research that transglutaminase can be used. It's a quite effective cross-linking enzyme in foods. It has already been shown to glue glutamine and lysine together, and it's used in dairy production. Here we can see a picture of such a fibril. Now this is made out of beta-lactoglobulin, which is a milk protein. And we can see they can also make a more structure looking more like maybe meat. We have these thick strands. So this is something new and maybe could be the coming technology to make something that should look like meat. Another and even more newer thing is high pressure. High pressure technology is not new in itself, but to make these fibril formation could be new things. This is definitely not a food protein, but it just shows that you are able to make again this fibrillar structure. It is a little is the same as you may have heard about where these steam culture where you actually grow meat in vitro. You just do it under high pressure, for example. So these are some of the new trends that could be used in the coming or should be investigated. Here we can see some, and now I call it plant-based meat. It's not meat, but this is what we have of word. So here are some techniques to make meat analogs. We have something called bottom-up strategy, meaning that we actually look at the molecular level. So this was, for example, the muscle fibers. Mycoprotein is also a way of making these meat things. You can see this is the culture meat. So this is on the molecular level. Then, of course, top-down strategy is where you have on the microscopic level, where extrusion is one of it. So you make something and then doing extrusion, and then you see what is coming out. Oh, this looks like meat, so this is a good candidate. The other thing is now there is a lot of talk about meat analogs and meat substitutes, but the thing is also, should we keep calling it meat analogs? Why not just call it something else? I don't have a solution, but for example, everybody more or less know tofu, they know tempeh. These are words that are somehow in itself. So we don't try to mimic meat, but maybe just try to make a product that actually is appealing for the consumer. So it both has some organoleptic properties that are good, meaning texture and taste, but maybe don't need to look or substitute meats as such. Some of these things, as you can see here, also come into the discussion about these ultra-processed foods. And that was also an issue raised by Michael. We need to process the plant here in order to get something out that, for example, look like meat or become a product that we can eat. Especially if it's these alternative raw materials. In order to get the taste, maybe, then as you can see here, we have a lot of non-protein ingredients put into these meat alternative products, whether it's meat analog or meat substitutes. And that is, of course, again, because plant proteins or plant sources doesn't taste maybe that appealing to all. It definitely doesn't taste like meat. The major problem with meat taste or challenge with meat taste is, of course, this umami taste. It's a basic taste and it's very related to meat. So it could be that maybe it should not be meat we will try or tend to produce, but some other products. Of course, the success will depend on their incorporation into a meal. So if we can make, again, a product that can be used in a meal in a right way so that the sensory perception is good, then maybe not be a problem to avoid meat. Or it's not because we need to avoid meat as such, but to eat plant proteins. This will again raise the question, is it healthy for the human to put all these things in it? And again, is it healthy for the planet? Is it sustainable to produce all these kind of compounds? Then about health. The challenge is, of course, again, the composition. If we take legumes or cereals, not everybody may be able to tolerate them. There are some allergies related to some of this. I have not heard of anybody who has allergy towards meat. I think that everybody can tolerate meat, but not everybody can tolerate plant proteins. The other thing is the digestibility. There are some essential amino acids that the body needs in order to be healthy and actually grow. And the thing is that in some plant proteins, they are in lack of some of these essential amino acids. And what worse is, they actually have some anti-nutritional factors. I think it's more or less a fact now that animal proteins have high digestibility, whereas plant proteins have lower digestibility. One thing about the lower digestibility of the plant protein is obvious, the anti-nutrition factors, but it's also because the plant proteins are in fact globular. So when we eat them, our enzymes in the stomach or in the GI tract are not able to hydrolyze them into amino acids. So as said before, relation to health is the amino acids. If we see a human muscle, what was some of the essential amino acids is lysine and methionine. Cysteine is not a essential amino acids, but is very important for the body also that we eat it in order to grow. We could say that a human muscle may be the ideal amino acid composition for muscle synthesis. And here you can see the requirements that we need to have of 2 of these amino acids. We know that soybean is a good protein source. It's more or less comparable to meat. Taking the grass, white clover, red clover, and lucerne, we can see that they also have quite good amino acids composition with respect to some of these amino acids. These amino acids, at least methionine and cysteine, are important because they contain sulfur, and that's an important compound for us to get. It is possible to live totally on plant-based food, of course, if you can figure out how to choose between cereals and legumes, because cereals has a high methionine content and cysteine, but low in lysine, whereas legumes is the other way around. So making combination, you will actually be able to provide your body with the necessary amount of these amino acids. So it's not just a matter of having enough protein, the protein content, but also the protein digestibility and thereby the amino acids availability. How can we then check that? Of course, we can measure the protein digestibility. There is a lot of methods for doing this. There has recently been published a kind of standard method for measuring in vitro protein digestion. Of course, it's still a simulation of the human gastrointestinal tract, but this is maybe the best way if it's not to be done in vivo. There are other problems or challenges in testing food or protein digestibility in vivo. Of course, the obvious one is you cannot take samples from a human stomach that easy. The other thing is it's kind of difficult to control and make sure that people are actually only eating what they are supposed to do. But the whole idea of this in vitro food or protein digestion is that you put in some protein, could either be raw protein, protein powder, or it could be your food product, and then doing this assays, you will you will destroy or hydrolyze the protein into amino acids you can then measure. So depending on the structure of the protein, you can measure how effective are the enzymes in the GI tract to break down this protein and into amino acids that then should be available for your body. Now, the problem with plant proteins or plant materials is then the anti-nutrition factor. And as you can see here, there is quite a huge list of the compounds that is actually anti-nutritional. And the thing is that some of them will inhibit your enzymes in your stomach or small intestine. That means that these enzymes will then of course not be able to hydrolyze the protein, and it will be no use of you. Other compounds will bind to the protein, then the enzymes do not have access to the proteins, and you will again not be able to hydrolyze it into amino acids, and it will be no good for your body again. There are of course ways to inactivate or get rid of these anti-nutrition factors, and one of them is, for example, heat. Then you of course need attention, because fiber is actually not only an anti-nutrition factor, it can also be good for your body. And polyphenols is also good for your body, especially because it's antioxidant and a lot of other good stuff for your body. So unfortunately, the things about plant protein or plant protein sources is not just black and white. There are different things to compare or think about. Here you can see an example of protein digestibility before and after extrusion. This is just an example. And as we can see, the raw material has quite low protein digestibility. When we have extruded it, it increases. Of course, there is also example the other way around, that it could be a lower in vitro protein digestibility after extrusion. As we can see here, these studies that have looked into this also report of reduced anti-nutrition factor. But this is not the only reason why we have a higher digestibility of the protein in the extruded one. The thing is also that, as I told you before, for example, extrusion changes the molecular structure of the plant proteins. It kind of open up the structure. It make it more accessible for the GI tract enzymes. So this point, from this point of view, processing is actually needed or may be needed in order for us to get the best out of the protein. So the food structure of, for example, after extrusion is not only affecting sensory properties, but also nutritional properties, that it kind of release the nutrients and make them accessible for our body. This also means that ultra processing may not be a bad thing. It depends on how you look at it or what you actually want to obtain. Because if it is, as said, the plant protein needs to be processed somehow in order to be able to obtain the use of the protein, meaning obtaining the amino acids. In worst case, you can say if you eat a lot of, for example, beans or whatever it is, plant proteins, it will just kind of go through you. So you don't get the benefits of eating the proteins. And that's not very sustainable either. So at the end, it is rather complex to transform to a sustainable and healthy diet or foods. You need to take into consideration what kind of molecules do you have for starting point, what are the molecular interaction to build the structure, how to produce it, what are the food products. It should of course be sensory acceptable or good, but what also happen in your stomach when you have eaten it. And therefore I think, and you will be the coming solution hopefully, it is possible to go into all this because it is of course important that researcher and food producers work together in order to deliver sustainable plant proteins, or at least sustainable protein supplies. So by this was, yes, the word. We can put this one on. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Vibeke. Thank you so much for this very, very nice, very rich
It was a little
presentation. And I'm sure the students will have a lot of questions because they are very aware. A lot of them have already worked on plant proteins, and so they are well aware of this problem.
Yes.
So we have time for 1-2 very short questions. So I will leave you the floor for the questions, and I switch off my camera. The first friend's eyes. So who's first? Matab, please. Unmute your mic and talk.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No. Oh. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
My question is that especially I have seen some projects, they are using a lot of raw materials, especially from plant source like sugar beet pulp for meat alternatives. So I'm just wondering, like, especially you already discussed about the structure point of view. The structure is also related to especially their nutritional as well as their shelf life point of view. They are related to their structure, or they are somewhat different?
But I can almost not hear you. Can you repeat the question? So if the food structure,
like the food structure in certain, especially raw material like sugar beet pulp, and some project they use for meat alternatives. I'm just interested, like the structure could be related to their shelf life as well as their preservation value.
Yeah, of course, it also needs to be stable. If you structure it into meat analog, and that's not always the case either, if I understand the question right. So even though you make a meat analog or a structure that resembles fibrin, for example, it may not be stable or have a shelf life for two things. One is that since it's not thermodynamically equilibrium, it will change, and the other thing is obvious for microorganisms or lipid oxidation, chemical deterioration, or microbial deterioration. Yes, that's also something that comes into aspect. Was that the answer?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I got it.
Otherwise, yeah, you can write to me also.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Luana has a question, by chat. So for me, trying a plant-based meat creates too much expectation in the consumers. In your opinion, do you believe producing something that looks and tastes like meat is the best strategy to increase plant protein consumption?
No, not especially. And this is the same thoughts that when you say something like meat analog or meat substitutes, people think about the meat taste. And maybe we should try to go away from that and say, okay, we need to have these plant protein based product that somehow stands for itself, kind of lecturing or teach consumer to eat that kind of foods instead. And I think that is possible, because I mean, you are the future consumer and your children are at least the future consumer. So the more that you are starting now trying to teach the youngsters or the next generation in how to eat plant-based foods will be, I think, much better, and it will be maybe easier to make a lot of kind of different products that stands for itself, and it becomes natural to have meals without meat. So I'm not necessarily in favor of making meat analog or substitutes.
Thank you, Vibeke, and thank you, Luana, for the question. And I absolutely agree with you, Vibeke. So thank you so much. And I'm very glad that this session is recorded. So, okay, a lot of students will have the possibility to go through your presentation again, because it's very rich. So thank you so much.
It was also a little fast. Yeah. You can share my email to the listener here. If they have questions, they can mail me, and then I can see if I have time to answer.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So let's introduce the next speaker, and it's Hind Bendaoud. We have the pleasure to have her here in our AgroParisTech headquarters. So Hind Bendaoud from Sodexo France. And so she's procurement and logistic director and at Sodexo. And Sodexo is one of the worldwide leaders for food services in multiple environments. And so before joining Sodexo, Hind held other procurement positions in European and global procurement teams for Sodexo, and previously that in food retails. So I give the floor to Hind to present the future, the next complexity, the new complexities for sustainable food supply chains.
Well, hello, everyone. I hope the technical aspect is working well. Do you hear me well? Yes, okay, great. So very happy to be with you today, and thank you for the invitation. Today, the aim of this session is to show you how these trends that have been already shared with the previous speakers, how they are impacting the business in food service, and to share with you how we are adapting. I can honestly share that some of them are big challenges to our operating model. So I will share with you how we are adapting to these new trends. So I think that the slides are coming through. Yes, great. I will put them full screen. I think it will be more comfortable for everyone. Okay, great. To start, I will share with you a very brief profile of Sodexo so that everyone is familiar with the company and can really relate to the trends I will share with you later on during the presentation. So we are a French company, and we are one of the global leaders in quality of life services. We are mostly known for food service, for catering in multiple environments, as Barbara mentioned. We are active in many different typology of clients, from education to seniors to healthcare to corporate environment and so on. Currently, about 70% of our spend is related to food, but we are also growing in additional services, especially in facility management. We are active in 67 countries, and our top 3 countries are first the US, then France, which is our historic market, and then the UK. So I will try during the presentation to give you some snapshots about different countries. So as I mentioned, the complexity of our business for food is that we need to cater for very different populations with very different needs. As you can imagine, the nutrition for kids to the nutrition of seniors requires that we have very specific design of our menus and product selection. I also wanted to share with you the corporate responsibility, I would say, snapshot from Sodexo, not to brag around the fact that we have many recognitions and awards, but just to show that the fact that we have been leading in the sustainability for many years. And as an example, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, that is one of the most recognized indices, has been given to us for 15 years, and it's a constant battle to ensure that we are always leading in that area. So all this, the fact that the CSR is a pillar of our strategy puts, of course, a lot of pressure on our procurement and supply chains, because we always need to be ahead of competition. And so this shows that it's always an ongoing continuous improvement of everything we do to ensure that we also keep this leading position. So to start with, I would like to share with you the major trends in food service, and many of them had been touched on by the previous speakers. So I will share first the ones that are already extremely, I would say, active, and the ones that we see are emerging. So first of all, we have a very strong market needs and consumer and client needs about the authenticity of the food, meaning what is the composition of the product, how the products are selected, are there any additives, how can we get rid of everything that is not necessary in the composition of the product, and how can we ensure that we have the most natural products in our menus. The second very important trend is all the responsible sourcing, I would say, or the responsible diet. And in this area, we have many expectations from the consumer and the market in general. I will not enter into all of them, but just to name a few, it's, for example, all the responsible sourcing for raw material like sustainable palm oil or soya, or for example, animal welfare is a very important emerging trend and is really challenging the meat industry. Also, for example, a lot about food waste. It's becoming a very important topic. How do you ensure that you are reducing the food waste during the production and also at the restaurant? What are all the policy and processes in place to reduce the food waste as much as we can? Also, Vibeke mentioned it many times, the plant-based protein, and how can we get a diet that is reducing the carbon footprint. So all the plant-based menus are a big topic for us. And there is one trend that I have put aside because we will focus on particularly, which is the locally sourced. All the local sourcing is a major disruption to the model in food service. There are many opportunities around local sourcing in terms of positive impact, but also I will share with you all the challenges it raises and how we need to adjust our model to be able to manage efficiently local sourcing. Another trend is the evolution of regulations. There are many regulations in food service, especially in public sectors, like in schools and all the restaurants, I would say, that are under the public umbrella. For example, in France, we have the EGalim law, and I will share with you what are the main impacts of EGalim law and what it means in terms of adjustments of the model. And last but not least, it's everything that has to do with plastic reduction. This is a very big topic around food industry. And there are many regulations all over Europe that are banning the use of disposable plastic, for example. So it is a trend that is at the same time evolution and regulation, with some commitments over the years to reduce the usage of plastic. And it is at the same time a very important consumer expectation. And sometimes the consumer expectation is even stronger in terms of timeline compared to the regulation that is being implemented. And in terms of emerging trends, I have selected two emerging trends. It's the circular economy, because it's really about the global holistic approach to the supply chain, meaning that more and more we need to have a very end-to-end view of the full chain of value. For example, a supply chain that would be locally sourced, but that would have a bad impact on the environment, or not having a good social impact, or producing food waste, would not be acceptable anymore. And this is really what we see, that we cannot consider all these sustainable, I would say, requirements one by one. But the aim is because you have to fix many different topics at the same time. But I really believe this is what the market is requiring, and this is the trends we are going towards. The second important emerging trend is the customization. It's really a very important trend we see at our clients, where every single site, every single contract is asking a very customized, even I would say tailor-made adaptation of their menus. And to give an example, for the local sourcing, we have many definitions. There might be in some countries a official definition of local sourcing, which would be, for example, 150 kilometers around the place where the food is consumed. But in reality, we do have many definitions and requirements that are extremely specific to each client. We even see today contracts with ultra local requirements, meaning the client will request that a part of the food will come from less than 10 kilometers. So that shows you the complexity we have to manage in these new contracts we are implementing. So if we focus on the local sourcing, I thought it would be one I would share with you today, because it's probably the one that is going the more strongly against the traditional, I would say, procurement system of economies and scale and efficiencies and so on. So it's a quite challenging one. And we are many of us in my team working around what will be the new model to manage efficiently local sourcing with the right arbitrage between having the positive impact of local sourcing, but at the same time not create a mess in managing the local sourcing dimension. So first of all, just wanted to share that the local sourcing is a trend that is extremely strong in many countries. It is very strong in Europe. It had been quite important in France for many years, and it was supported by the public sector. It has also been a topic for us at Sodexo in the Nordic countries, in the Benelux countries, and we have seen a very strong, I would say, rise of the topic also in Mediterranean lately. And it is also a big topic in the US, especially on the coasts. So it's not something that is, I would say, only in a part of the world. It's a quite important topic everywhere. And there are a variety of reasons for consumers to want local sourcing. Some of them want it because it gives reassurance about the product. It seems more authentic, more fresh. It gives them the confidence that the product they are using is more, I would say, good for the health. This is a perception, of course, but this is a perception of most of the consumers. Some of them are more requiring local sourcing for environmental reasons, thanks to the reduction of logistics and then reducing their carbon footprint with their diet. And another part of the consumers are really interested by local sourcing because of the positive social impact on their communities. This enables to keep jobs, industries, farms, and so on in their neighborhood, I would say. Whatever I would say is the reason behind local sourcing, what we can say for sure is that it brings much complexity based on a procurement model that is looking for massification and rationalization of suppliers and ranges. The basic, I would say, procurement process will want to have a streamlined number of suppliers, number of products, economies of scales, enabling good negotiation with the suppliers and so on. And of course, local sourcing means a much higher complexity because you are going to really increase significantly the number of products, the number of suppliers you have in your catalog. It also requires much more actions to manage risks, and Michael touched on it earlier. For example, for the food safety, instead of having to manage a limited number of big suppliers who have, I would say, good traceability and quality systems, you will be working with much more smaller companies, and you will have to be much more, I would say, connected to them to also support them in their quality management, because sometimes it's companies that cannot afford to have the full quality system that have the big industries. It also brings an issue on logistics fragmentation, because instead of consolidating a lot of raw material or ingredients on a limited number of warehouses, you are going to multiply the flow between the different places where the food is grown or produced, the warehouses, and then the end delivery places. And this is something that could go against the local sourcing, one of the local sourcing positive impact about carbon footprint. So for all the part about having a positive impact on the environment, this is a very important point to tackle, because otherwise you could end up having worst carbon footprint for local sourcing compared to a much more massified logistic flow. In terms of operational model, it also brings some disruption, because it will require from the companies to adapt their organization. If the buyers were used to manage 20 suppliers, all of a sudden they will have to manage on the same category 100 suppliers to allow for local sourcing and having much more different companies on that category. So meaning that in most of the companies where local sourcing becomes an important dimension, it will require to have more buyers managing the suppliers. And I would say as a conclusion to all that, of course, local sourcing brings higher costs in terms of buying the products, because they are also often more premium products, more niche products, but also in managing the suppliers and managing the complexity. This at the end will bring more costs to the organization for local sourcing. So when we have all this in mind, I think that nobody questions the fact that local sourcing is a trend that is really present, and that it is a market requirement and it's not going to change. I would say that the objective, or what is at stake, how can you find the right balance between the local sourcing part in the product catalog and the part of the procurement that can be still massified, unconsolidated. And on top of this, you need to find the right balance between all the sustainability dimensions. As I mentioned, in the circular economy, it's not only about one or two dimensions. You could have a local supplier, but it could be not the best, for example, in terms of animal welfare or impact on environment. So it's really to ensure that the local supplies that are being developed are being the best in most of the dimensions. And to give you an example about this arbitrage we need to find between the different dimensions, I have selected the one project we are working on that is called Future 50 Foods. It is a project we have developed with the WWF and the Unilever. And it was based on the fact that 75% of our food comes from only 12 plant species and 5 animal species. So that we needed to expand our ingredients we use in our menus. Of course, the 75% and the numbers are not for Sodexo only. It was a general, I would say, calculation. But here the decision was to say, let's ensure that we have much more ingredients we are using. We had taken the decision that this search would be only for plant-based products, and the products needed to be with a high nutritional value and that were positive in terms of environment, not requiring too much resources, water, and so on. So the little list you see about the 50 ingredients, and sorry, it is in French, but the idea was not to go into detail, but it's just to show that we had some products that are already quite well known and some very exotic products. And the idea now is for each country of Sodexo to identify the products that are making the most sense in terms of the ability to grow the products in the country. For example, lentils is one of the products we want to push further in our menus, and we are now working in combination with the Future 50 Food project and our local sourcing strategy, and we are now implementing more and more partnerships with producers for environmental value. And this is for us the combination of the local sourcing approach, but also ensuring that we take into account the other dimensions. So this is what I wanted to share with you regarding the local sourcing. The other topic about how sometimes the regulation requires us to go towards even more sustainable supply chains. In France, Egalim law has been implemented about 1 year ago, and you can see the main requirement There are many, many more than that, but I have chosen the 5 major ones. And it shows how the government in France want to promote more sustainable and responsible nutrition in the public sector. And for example, if we take the fourth requirement, that is requiring that in 2022, 50% of the food in all the public sector must come from an organic or certified product. So this is a quite challenging, I would say, and quite ambitious expectation. I'm showing you now on the slide which are the certifications that are eligible. And you can see that organic is acceptable, and also a variety of certification like Label Rouge, which is a very, I would say, responsible certification for growing mainly meat and the protein-based products in France. And we have also some sustainable seafood certification, or HVE, which is high environmental value, and it is mostly for the fruit and vegetables so far. I wanted to share with you some of the challenges around this law that all the food service will need to apply in now less than 2 years. It's the limited volumes and availability, because 50% of the volumes of all the food service industry is quite big. So this will be a challenge to all this supply chain and the producers, because they are going to be able to adapt to the new demand in terms of volumes to the market. Also, those companies are often small companies, meaning that in terms of forecasting and operating model for the food service, we are going to be extremely well connected with them, that they can anticipate the volumes that will be needed and ensure that they have the volumes available when their product is on the menu on a certain day. And the other challenge, which is not, I would say, a small one, is the cost. Because the cost of all those certifications is significantly higher. So it will represent, I would say, very important overcost to all the contracts, moving from standard products to all those certified new expectations. So in terms of adaptation, I wanted to share with you some of the activity we are putting in place to ensure that in this, I would say, moving industry or moving environment, we are taking all these changes and market requirements as an opportunity, meaning that we don't see it as a disruption to our model, but more as an opportunity to be agile and ensure that our organization is well able to answer the new market needs or the new regulation, and even have, I would say, an anticipation of what will be the trends of tomorrow, to be able to have some differentiation around this sustainable supply chain. So first of all, as I mentioned, the organization is key. Meaning that we had a team of buyers that were managing their categories at national level, and we had another team of buyers that were regionally located. And actually, these last 2 years, we have reinforced strongly the mandate and the missions of those regional buyers, to ensure that they are very well connected to the territory they are located in, because they are the best ones to identify all the local producers and have with them this proximity and all the relationship and the networking, this small organization, because most of the time it's small companies all the support they need to be able to fulfill the requirements of food service. So in terms of organization, it has been a tremendous help for us to be able to have this regional organization of buyers. The second point is the sourcing and the supplier development. As I mentioned, with EGalim requesting for 50% of certified products or local sourcing that becomes a mandatory requirement of most of our contracts, we had to really expand the availability of local products and also all the certified products. So here we have two strategies. We are listing additional suppliers and products into our catalog, but we are also making our suppliers switch to the new requirements. Meaning that, for example, when we have some suppliers who have standard production, but we have been working with them for a very long time, we are helping them moving their production from standard to organic, from standard to high environmental value, and so on. And actually, it is helping them not only for the Sodexo volumes, but to ensure that they remain very relevant to the market expectations. The third one is a evolution of our IT systems and reporting, and it is an extremely important one because the complexity of the data we manage is huge. Meaning that when you have a few, not few, but a limited number of suppliers on SKUs, you can manage it in a certain way and with certain tools. When we are expanding your catalog and you need to have so many attributes of products, organic, local, high environmental value, label rouge, and all these different attributes, you are really managing a very high complexity in your data. And of course, you need to be able to report to your clients on all this supply chain transparency because they are expecting a certain level of how can I say, ability to really understand what you have been supplying to their restaurant. And the fourth one, and it's a very important one, you can see that all these trends are requiring from us a lot of efforts and change of organization. So it is very important that we get a return on investment of all these efforts. So we are really also using this procurement strategy as a major differentiation on the market and value creation. So these are the main 4 points I wanted to share with you. And to conclude, I had some closing remarks. All these requests of the market and all the impact it has on our operating model may seem very challenging. And this is true that it requires a lot of adjustments. But I think we are ahead of very exciting times for the sustainable food supply chains because it is the right time to make this supply chain change and become with a more positive impact on many dimensions: environmental impact, social impact. I also wanted to share that I think that we cannot manage it without technology, and especially around data. And we are, for example, piloting some projects like with blockchains that are giving more access to the supply chain transparency and authenticity with all the different players. So I have very high hopes in the fact that technology will help us manage better this complexity. And for the students who are interested by procurement, I think that the importance of these supply chains, the visibility, the transparency that the market requires will really increase even more in the future, and that this will become a very important responsibility of the procurement function. So here again, I think we are ahead of very interesting and exciting times for the function. So thank you for listening, and I will be happy to answer any question.
Thank you so much, Hind. It was a very, very nice presentation, very complementary to the previous one, and even, yes, completing aspects and reasoning with the introductory lecture by Michael. So thank you so much. We have time for questions. Students. Oh, yes, all the attendees, of course. Sorry, all the attendees, you can all ask questions, including colleagues, other speakers. Can you hear me? Yes? So ask questions. Do you have any questions? I don't see very well. So there is a question on the chat by AD Natalia. Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is the following one. Linking with Vibeke's presentation, how many difficulties do you find when customers are looking for local sourcing in plant-based food and meals?
So Barbara, can you please just say the last part of the question again?
So linking with Vibeke's presentation, how many difficulties do you find when customers are looking for local sourcing in plant-based food or meals?
And maybe one first comment, and I think it will be very close to what Vibeke has said. We had different strategies and testing about the alternative to meat and the plant-based. We have tried in the past because the consumers or some clients wanted us to have analogs to meat, but we don't believe it's the right option. Because actually we were having some menus for kids and they were supposed to eat a sausage, and actually it was a trick. It wasn't a sausage, it was something with a plant-based, and we did have a quite negative feedback at the end, even if we had a strong demand from our clients to use that kind of product. And this is why we have moved away from meat alternatives. And the Future 50 project is to be very transparent and clear that it's a vegetarian menu, but with plant-based products, legumes and cereals and other vegetables that are cooked in such a way that it's appealing to our consumer. It can be a kid or an adult at work or whatever the typology of the client. We need to be creative enough to create the right recipes that will make the vegetarian menus appealing without trying to trick and having something that looks like meat in the plate. So this is our approach, and this is why we have put a contest, global contest, with many chefs from many countries who have regrouped and have cooked for several days with all the Future 50 ingredients. And out of that workshop, we have chosen 40 recipes that have been implemented in our menus last year based on the 50 ingredients of the future. So this is our, I would say, orientation. So far, how can I say, the reception of our clients is quite good. I think we are in a better position rather than the meat alternative.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you. Thank you so much. There is another question by Luana by chat. So do you bring these new trends to your clients with maybe new menu suggestions and products to test, or it is mostly based in their demand?
For example, we have some segments of clients who are quite innovative and asking for new, I would say, menus. And for example, I mentioned that Egalim Law requests vegetarian menus in the schools. So we do have some typology of clients who are more advanced than the others. However, all the work we do for all these clients is used for the other segments. For example, in the corporate environment, like the restaurants within the companies, there is no regulation and no expectation for a vegetarian menu, but we are introducing it into our client sites. So I would say it's a combination. In some cases, we have some clients that are very demanding because it's also part of the nutritional painless and all around nutrition for seniors. Other typology of consumers have no, I would say, such a formalized expectation, but we are proposing to them.
Thank you so much. There is another question by Eric Anderson, our colleagues from Lund. When the demand for organic food increases, will there be enough of suppliers? Compare with, for example, bioplastics, where there is not enough to supply large companies.
So regarding bioplastic, it's one of the most challenging topics we have to tackle now. So if you have some good, I would say, sources of bioplastic, we would be much more very interested to exchange and discuss it. But so far, we have been quite disappointed by the bioplastic. We thought it was a good idea, but when we have worked with experts on the field and with some NGOs who are supporting us in finding alternatives to plastics, at the end, when we took the whole chain value of the bioplastic, we found that it was not as virtuous as we thought. So initially, we were doing a lot of effort to reduce the plastic consumption and move towards, for example, corn-based bioplastic and so on. But at the end now, our orientation is more to reduce the use of plastic and promote the reusable meal containers and food disposable, I would say, tableware.
Thank you so much. There are other questions? So in Toulouse, so could you give us an overview on timeline it takes for procurement when it comes to finding a new source? What kind of roadblocks do you face in getting enough supply when specific ingredient demand increases? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question, because this idea of phasing and timelines is so important to us. And when we are taking commitments around the sustainable food supplies, we always need to provide our best guess about what should be the timeline. I can share with you the timeline for one of the commitments we have taken a couple of years ago, which is animal welfare for the eggs. We have taken the commitment that we are going to move to cage-free eggs. To ensure that we are not using anymore the eggs that are produced in, I would say, not compliant conditions to animal welfare. And it has been a commitment that has been taken by Sodexo globally. So we have a roadmap to increase the level or the portion of eggs we buy every year until we achieve the 100% we want in a few years' time. And I mentioned earlier that we have a strategy not to get rid of our old suppliers, but to make them evolve with us. So this time is also used to ensure that our suppliers who have been loyal and good partners to us are also adapting to this new market requirement. And for example, for this particular commitment, we need about 5 years time. So it gives an idea of the time frame.
Thank you so much. Do you have other questions? Or orally also, you can raise your hand and we can give you the floor by mic. No, I don't see any. No, so thank you so much, Hind. It was very, very interesting. And so I propose we move to the next presentation. Yes, so we are very pleased to parce que j'ai déconnecté. Hello? Okay, sorry. I was presenting to you. I was presenting to you Alisa Tiganj. She's connected by phone with us, so I will leave you the floor. Leave her the floor in a minute. So Alisa Tiganj is from the European Commission, and she's an official of the European Commission and currently responsible of the coordination of food policy and the Farm to Fork strategy in units on policy perspectives in DG Agri. She holds a degree in international relations and a master's degree in European law and policy. So I will try to connect her slides and connect the audio as well. Yes.
Yes. Excellent.
So I will share your slides. And you can tell me when it's time to change slides, okay?
Yes. Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. It's honestly quite frustrating that I cannot join you, that you see me at least on video, or that I can manage the slides. I think it's already frustrating that we cannot see each other face to face and person to person, but okay, this is the new reality. So I'm really grateful for this invitation to join the event, and especially for this very, very interesting and insightful debate. I must say I've learned a lot from all the three presentations, and what makes me very happy is to see that all of these presentations and elements which were raised really fit within the new strategy that we have adopted not long ago, Farm to Fork strategy. So it's really something that we want to see. Farm to Fork has, of course, its policy objectives, but one of the key goals we want to engage the public, to launch the debate about sustainable food systems with stakeholders across all walks of life, from academia to authorities at different levels and so on. So we want to have this broad debate how to best formulate a sustainable food policy. So thank you for participating and contributing to this. And well, the adoption of this communication on the farm to fork is only the first step. This is a political vision of the Commission on how we see the sustainable food systems and where we see we should go by 2030 and further on. But this is not the end of the line. So this is the beginning. And this will be followed by a number of very concrete actions and a lot of legislative proposals. If you have seen the strategy, you can see that there are at least 27 new actions which will come in the next month and years. So I really hope that you will find an interest. There are a lot of different actions, from food production to food processing, labeling, and that you will stay engaged in this process as well. So because you can also contribute to this through public consultations that we organize. So when talking about maybe the next slide, please, Barbara, if I may ask you, the first one actually, on the Green Deal. Yes. So when we talk about farm to fork, we have to place in the wider context of the European Green Deal. So I don't know if you know, but European Green Deal is certainly the flagship initiative of the Commission. It's a roadmap on how to for the transformation of not only European economy, but also European society. So, and the Green Deal is for everybody. If you see, they're all sectors of European economy are expected to contribute to reach the objectives of the Green Deal, from transport, the decision we make as citizens on how we commute, to energy efficiency of our homes, to the way how we produce and consume food and so on. There are so many different elements which fit under this Green Deal umbrella, and farm to fork is one of them, and this is where it comes in. So next slide, please. With farm to fork, we want to address some of the very pertinent challenges that we face in Europe. We have heard through these different presentations a lot of elements which already fit in here. But for example, today's Europe is facing what we call uncomfortable truths, because we have on one side, we have population which is growing. We need to provide sufficient food supply. At the same time, we have natural resources which are under pressure. We have millions of citizens which live in poverty, but on the other hand, we waste a lot of food. We have half of adult population which is overweight. On the other hand, we have millions who cannot afford a decent meal, even here in Europe. We have farmers' incomes which are low. We have health issues which are related to nutrition and so on. So there are a lot of different challenges and elements. I could not list all of them. So the point was how to square this circle, what this strategy could do in order to address these challenges. So in addition to all of the challenges that I have mentioned, we have had also COVID pandemics. We haven't heard much about it today, but we have had it struck unexpectedly, I think, for all of us. So by far, this is one of the biggest public health challenges of our modern times, but also it has transformed itself into a big also socioeconomic challenge. Next slide, please. So when we adopted Farm to Fork in May this year, it was actually in the middle of this evolving crisis, if I may call it, the COVID pandemic. So we had to go back to the drawing board at a certain stage when drafting Farm to Fork with our colleagues from other directorates and adapt it to the new reality, because COVID has reminded us of the importance, on one hand, of how essential it is to ensure that our citizens have uninterrupted access to food supply, to food, and also secondly, of the importance of a resilient food system and also food supply chain. So we have seen how strongly the food supply chain is interlinked and also dependent on the good functioning of other policies, like the functioning of the internal market, labor availability and labor conditions, logistics and transport and so on. And I'm pretty sure that colleagues from Sodexo have experienced, maybe, I don't know, we haven't talked about it much, but this was a new reality that many people had to face in the food supply chain with this pandemic. So all of this has reinforced the emphasis of the farm-to-fork strategy also on food security, on the resilience of food systems, but at the same time also on the long-term goal and on the sustainability, both in terms of the environmental sustainability, social and also economic one. So the challenges are many. I have mentioned only a few. So the question was how to square this circle, how to make, for example, just to give you one example, how to make sure that European production is more sustainable in environmental terms without increasing the costs of production and also finally the cost of the food and the final product for Europeans. So it's a very challenging area to work in, and the strategy was really looking at all the dimensions of sustainability. The novelty of this strategy is that it looks at all of these challenges in an integrated way. So we're talking about food systems, so a system approach, and not individual components. We are not just focusing on what the farmer has to do, but it's a vision on how to transform the way how we produce, how we process, how we distribute, and how we consume our food. So as you will see, the strategy puts also consumers strongly in the focus and makes also direct links to the production and to other stages of the chain. Because we recognize that the consumers can, to a large extent, drive what is produced and put on the market through the choices they make. And we have heard this from several presentations, and there has to be this link between the production and consumption and how the consumers can influence also the what is finally put on the market. There was a question before also on the organic production. If there is a big demand for organic products, how do we ensure that there is a supply? Well, this should then send market signals to the producers. They see that there is a strong demand, there is an economic opportunity for them, and more of them will then switch to the organic type of farming than currently. So these are the links that the strategy wants to make. And we see, and we have heard from these presentations also just before, that the impact, that the consumers can have, it's already there. People are demanding to know where their food comes from, how it is produced, what is the impact it has had, for example, in third countries and deforestation and so on. So this is already going. There is a momentum, so we want to capitalize on this momentum, which is getting stronger. So in order to make sure that consumers are really empowered to make the right choices, the point of this strategy is to create appropriate food environment, which we call. It's not about telling people what they have to eat, but it's to put the right conditions in place where the consumer can make informed choice about what they're buying. So it's not about telling them you have to eat this. It's more about making the sustainable and healthy choice the obvious one and the easy choice. And here we are looking at a number of issues that will be coming up. And if you're interested in this area, you can always contribute. We are looking at the area of, from nutritional composition of product to nutritional information, what kind of information we provide, labeling. We have heard a lot also about animal welfare. So there is an idea which was floated about having animal welfare labeling, then their marketing standards. So all of these concrete initiatives will come up in the next months and years. There is a concrete schedule when to expect them. And if you're interested in these areas, you can always contribute when there is a public consultation. And also, lastly, we should not forget that the strategy also wants to instill an understanding that sustainability is also a growth strategy. It's not only a cost which will be for all those involved, but there is an economic opportunity for Europe and for our agri-food sector to stay a global leader, because we're already a leader in many ways, and also to benefit from this first mover position and to have competitive advantage globally. So this is the vision of the farm to fork, and from all the presentations we have heard today, you will find everything we have heard. There are elements which fit and which could be further developed, and they fit within this framework of creating sustainable food systems by 2030. And of course, all of this doesn't happen just by Commission preparing a political document. We need cooperation from everybody, either experts, even us as consumers, decisions we take, politicians, academia, and so on. So I hope that all of you can find your area of interest within this strategy, and also you can dig deeper in certain elements, and then, as I said, contribute to the public consultations, and also send us your contributions on areas which are of your interest. So this was as a way of conclusion to very interesting and informative presentations. I hope you could hear me well, because through the phone I don't have any feedback if you can hear me well or not. But thank you very much. I hope I was not too long.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So now it's time for questions. So hold on the phone. And let's see if there are questions by the attendees. Are there any questions from all the attendees of this webinar? Hello, can you hear me?
I'm here. I can hear you.
I think it was a splendid way to conclude this. Splendid way to conclude the workshop, because in some extent you give here the European vision of this sustainable food system. Today we have with us the opportunity to have people from all over the world, and so I will be very pleased if they could give their own vision from their point of view, their experience in their own country, and maybe make some parallelism or arising some complementarities or different ways of thinking or approaching these problems. So students, please feel free to, or students or attendees, colleagues, do not hesitate to have a discussion now. You can ask a question by raise your hand or on the chat. And I really would like to thank you, Alisa, for coming and being here with us by phone, but it is really important to have this opportunity to have the feedback from the European Commission, because it's a long way to establish these strategies. And so it is also good to see on the all different levels, okay, which are the visions. So if there are no questions, maybe we can close here the meeting. Yes, there is a question by Lucas Lugin. So how would you like to assure that the food business within Europe is, and I don't, can you? Is made in a self-sustaining way? And this question is for who? For Alisa? Yes, Alisa, have you any elements to answer to?
Could you repeat, please, because I could not hear well.
Okay. How would you like to assure that the food business within Europe is made in a self-sustaining way?
Well, we have heard very good presentation from from Sodexo, I think there is already a lot in terms of sustainability, which is already done by businesses and by agri-food sector, by processing and so on. So I think this is already, there is already a very, we're not starting from scratch. There is already a high level of consciousness and a lot of innovation and a lot of investments which are made to make sustainability part of the business culture of companies which are in agri-food sector. So this is already a good starting point. And there are, you will see in the strategy, there are a couple of new initiatives which will come from our side, which would give additional push in this direction. These don't always come in form of hard legislation, but they're often guidelines, and we work together with the industry to develop codes of conduct, good practices, and so on in terms of integrating sustainability into their practices. And I think this will then lead to a high level of culture within companies, and this will then hopefully become self-sustainable, as you have said. But I think maybe colleagues from Sodexo could also go complete, because I think there is already so much that is being done, and it was really great presentation.
So we will leave the floor to a moment to Hind to complete this answer. Thank you, Alisa. And then there will be another question.
Yes, and I'm fully aligned with the Alisa comment that not everything comes from a hard legislation. We can see that in many dimensions of sustainability, there is some work done well before there is a hard legislation that will impose some guidelines, I would say. And it is also coming from the consumer, I would say, expectations on the sustainability topics. And it is a good combination to have at the same time legislation and more expectation from the consumers, because they are pushing also sometimes it's really good that they're also using their power of selling or buying or not buying to ensure that the practices are more and more sustainable.
Thank you. Thank you, Hind. So there were another question for, no, it was more a thank from Eric Anderson for Alisa. And Eric wants to thank you for the summary and for the highlights, both challenges and opportunities. And so now I closed communication with you, Alisa, and we will continue by the webinar. So thank you so much again for being with us. And I will yes, I will come back again here. Can you see me? Okay, so it's I think time to close this this webinar, and I would like to thank you all for participating, for sharing with us your vision on these opportunities and challenges for the transition to sustainable, healthy, and inclusive food systems. And I would like to thank all the attendees that were asking questions. So do not hesitate if you have any questions to send us by email or directly. I can share with you the mail of Vibeke, as she said before. So it's just the beginning of another year with FIPDes, and this is really the backbone of your training here in food innovation and product design masters. So I thank you again for your participation. I would like to thank all my colleagues here in the backstage, Marwen Moussa, Jana Perret, and Isabelle Lessi, and Manon Shenbo, for helping me for the technical issues. And so I say you goodbye and have a nice and safe day ahead. Bye-bye.